My therapist of 14 years mailed me a banker's box of session transcripts last September. I have only ever attended 6 of those sessions. The other 624 were attended by someone else. Someone with my name. My insurance card. My voice on the recordings. My handwriting on the intake forms. I have been sitting with the box for 4 months. I have read 41 of the transcripts. They describe a life I have not lived. They describe a person who is not me. The person uses my name. The therapist calls her by it. She answers to it. Dr. Marie Lindemann had her office in a small medical complex in Whitcomb, Michigan. 2nd floor, above a chain pharmacy. Beige carpet, leather chairs, 3 framed prints of Lake Superior in winter. The waiting room had a fish tank and a wicker basket of magazines on the floor. The reception desk was staffed by a woman named Patricia who had been there for 19 years. She knew my mother. She greeted me by name the first time I walked in. I have not been back to that office since 2012. The bills kept coming for 14 years. I assumed it was a billing error. I started seeing Dr. Lindemann in March of 2011. My mother had passed at the end of January. I went to 6 sessions over 4 months. We talked about grief. We talked about my father. We talked about my fear of becoming her. After the 6th visit, I told the doctor I felt finished. She agreed. She wished me well. I shook her hand. I drove home and did not go back. The bills kept arriving. I called the insurance company twice. They told me everything was being paid correctly. The therapy was within network. I let it go. The banker's box arrived last September with no return label. I assumed it was a wedding gift from my sister, mailed late. I opened it on the kitchen counter. Inside were 630 file folders. Each was labeled with my name. Each contained typed transcript pages, handwritten intake forms, signed consent documents, and printed receipts for sessions. The earliest dated March of 2011. The most recent dated August of last year. I sat at the counter and read the most recent one. The transcript described a woman who was struggling to leave her husband. I have never been married. My first thought was simple. Dr. Lindemann had mixed up 2 patients with similar names. I called the office and asked for Patricia. She remembered me. She told me Dr. Lindemann had retired in June and wanted her patients to have their files. She read me back the names she had on file under my name. The address was one I had lived at in 2016 for 9 months. The phone number was one I had used for 1 year. The credit card on file expired last December. I had cancelled that card last December. They had my history. They had me. Not the wrong person. I sat with the box for 2 weeks. I read transcripts in order. The first 6 matched my memory of my sessions. The 7th was held the week after I stopped going. I had no memory of it. The transcript was a woman talking about her mother's death. The grief was specific to the way my mother had died. The transcript continued for 30 pages. The woman cried. She described my father's hands. She described the way my mother held her coffee cup. She described the smell of my mother's hospital room. None of these details have I shared with anyone. I drove to Whitcomb in October. Patricia let me into Dr. Lindemann's old office. She gave me the key to the file cabinet. The signed intake forms were still inside. 630 of them, one per session. The signatures were identical. They were my signature. I have a peculiar way of crossing my T's. The crosses are too high, attached to the tops of the letters. Every signature had that high cross. The intake forms were in my handwriting. I write in a slight back slant. They were all in the slight back slant. I checked one against a recent check I had written. Same hand. The most recent transcripts referenced audio recordings. I called Patricia and asked. She said yes. Every session was recorded with patient consent, stored on a secure server. She sent me login credentials. I logged in that night. I downloaded the recording from session 347. The voice that answered the doctor's prompt was my voice. Not similar. Not a good impression. Mine. The exact register, the slight Michigan accent, the small breath I take before I begin a sentence. The patient described a memory of being 7 and watching a man in the woods behind our house. I have that memory. I have never told anyone. Dr. Lindemann is dead. I drove to her retirement community in November to ask her directly. She had passed in October from a stroke at the assisted living facility, 2 weeks after she retired. Her junior associate gave me the news. He had been with the practice for 6 years. I asked if he had ever met me before. He said yes, that I had been one of his weekly patients since 2019. He described what I was wearing. He told me I had a small birthmark on the back of my left hand. I do not have a birthmark on the back of my left hand. I looked. The skin was smooth. The practice still has me scheduled. Every Tuesday at 4. The junior associate calls each month to confirm. I have not gone in. I am told my appointments are still being attended. The recordings continue. The associate sends new transcripts every 2 weeks. I do not read them anymore. I leave the envelope sealed in the banker's box. The transcripts describe a person who knows things only I know. She uses my name. She uses my insurance. She has a birthmark on her left hand. I went to my next Tuesday appointment last week. I have not come home. The transcripts from that session arrived this morning. They describe a woman opening a banker's box at her kitchen counter.